Hi, I'm Lauren and welcome back to my craft room. I'm excited to have you back for my interactive element series, and this month I am using Pearblossom Press's Easy Lights. So this is week 3 and I've paired them with Trinity stamps. They have these really cute stamp sets that are magical wizards. If you catch my drift, what they're based on. Anyway, here's my card. I have my 3 little wizards here with their wands, and when you push here, their wands light up. Lumos, right? So I am really excited to show you how I made this card, so let's get right into it. So I'm using this really fun set from Trinity Stamps called Magical Wizards, and I stamped out the 3 wizards and wands as well as the little bright little lines around the wands. And I used a pencil to draw a circle around on the inside of those little bright line thingies because I cut this out using my scan and cut, and I wanted to make sure that my scan and cut recognized that as a shape. So I'm using an eraser and getting rid of that pencil line now that they are cut out. I also stamped my images in Onyx Black VersaFine and embossed it with a clear detailed embossing powder and colored them in using my Zig Clean color. I didn't show the coloring because the card process does take a while and I didn't want this to be a very long video. I've cut out my background using some mixed media paper with the largest stitched rectangle from Lawn Fawn, and I'm going to distress my background with Distress Oxides. I start with this purple here, and I'm going along the long edge, the 5.5 inch edge, and starting with purple to make my sky background. And then I'm going to go to the blue here, and that was Dusty Concord. I'm going to the blue here in Chip Sapphire, and that's going to be my next kind of level in my sky. And I go back and forth to really blend those colors in. And then my last color I'm going to use is Black Soot because I'm making a night sky. So my sky is transitioning from purple to blue to black to make it look like it's now a setting sun, or the sun has set, and I'm gonna have a moon on my card, so it will be a very pretty night sky. And once I'm happy with the blend, I'm gonna clean up my workstation here and bring out my splatter box. I'm using these metallic paints from Prima. I spritz some water into the gold, and I'm just using a large paintbrush to pick up that paint and splatter it onto the background of my paper. Splattered onto the paper that is my background. I pick up some of that color because I want more of the metallic shine, and I also sprinkle on some sparkle silk to give more shimmer and sparkle to the card. Now I also use these really cute die cuts from Trinity Stamps. I will have everything down in the description below of everything that I used. And I'm cutting out the ground that my wizards are going to be standing on, as well as that castle piece and some trees, as you'll see in a little bit, and a moon and clouds. But before I get too far ahead of myself, I want to make sure I stamp the push here, and I stamp that in VersaMark and emboss it with white powder as it is on a black background. And I did that after playing with the placement of my 3 wizards to make sure that I wasn't going to put that push here in a place that I needed to put my wizards. So now that that is done, I'm going to start gluing on some of these die cut images to the background, starting with the castle here, which to me is going to be our Hogwarts castle, and that will go just behind the tallest part of this hill here. And I punched out all of the windows because I also die cut the castle in yellow because I wanted to create kind of light coming from my castle. And I'm using glue and my jewel picker to put in those windows. So I'm layering in the yellow inside of that black. And I also cut out from this die cut set 4 trees, and I'm going to glue those on as well. I like to put the ground back in where it's going to go so I can see where the placement of everything will be. And I'm going to use my reverse tweezers here to help me place those down. If you've been watching me for a while, will get glue everywhere. I wipe glue on my hands, not thinking that I need to use my hands for other things on this card. So I'm trying really hard to make sure I don't get glue everywhere by using my tweezer to help me place everything. And once I have all 4 of those trees down, we can start working on applying our lights to our wizards here. So I have my lights. I want to make sure my button is right behind the push here, and I'm going to pop up my ground. Now the Easy Light does have a very nice thin profile, but these are pretty thin foam squares, so I am going to double them up. I'm using black because I'm using a lot of dark colors on my card, and so I'm going to use the 2 largest on the sides and then use some small ones. And that's mostly because I ran out of the large ones. So I've doubled up large ones, and now I'm doubling up some small ones and placing those onto this ground piece. And now I could start applying my lights to my wizard. So I'm only going to do it behind my girl wizard here. I'm using some strong tape to make sure that my light stays in place. I'm making sure my LED faces towards the image, so it's going to be, right now we're looking at the back of the LED, and I'm lining up these wires to curve behind my wizard so you can't see them. So I'm going to just work it here and use some more of that tape, and I want to make sure I'm using good strong tape and placing it to hold the wires in place. So I'm just wrapping it around the back of my wizard, and I'm going to do the same thing for all 3. So now that all 3 are done, I am going to start placing them onto the card where I had originally wanted them to go when I was laying them out. So my girl wizard is here on the left, my boy wizard with the glasses is here in the middle, and my redheaded wizard here is on the right. And now that they are all glued down, I did see a little bit of my tape showing, so I'm just using my paper snips to cut that away. Now I'm going to just reinforce some of these areas with some strong double-sided sticky tape, and I'm not going to release the paper. I'm just putting it on just to help keep that wiring in place. I don't want any tugging. I want to make sure they're going to stay right where I want them. And now I'm going to wrap these wires. It's really nice that they aren't very long for this purpose because I'm trying to hide it all behind my ground here. But I also don't want to tweak anything or bend anything too sharp. So I'm just going to wrap them around nicely behind and around all of my foam squares and just use some tape to help keep that all in place. And once I'm happy with it, I'm going to also put some double-sided sticky tape behind my battery compartment and use my bone folder just to make sure that has a really good seal onto my battery compartment. And I will peel up that release tape, and then silly me forgot to peel up all of my foam squares, but that's okay. I was more focused on my compartment, and I'm placing it onto the background. So now I have to go back and peel off all the release tape or the release paper from my foam squares, and I'm just making sure my corners line up so my ground here fits perfectly on the bottom of the card. I'm happy with it. I test the light multiple times because I always like to do that. Gotta make sure it's working. And then I realized that my wizards need a lot more support. So I am double stacking some more foam squares and placing them behind the wizards' heads. And I'm also gonna place some foam squares just behind the hand of the wizards holding their wand, just to give it a little more support. And once that's done, I'm going to put this onto a card base. So I've cut out a top folding, well, I guess it's not like top folding if it's in landscape, a top folding landscape card base here for some heavy duty cardstock. And I'm using some strong double-sided tape from my big tape runner here. And I'm gonna put that onto my card base. And I realized that my card base is a little big, so I am just going to trim off that edge using these large scissors. And now that my card is pretty much assembled, it's time to work on a sentiment. I also die cut the moon and some clouds, but I'm going to stamp my sentiment in white embossing powder onto black paper. So I'm going to stamp it with VersaMark. So I'm just lining them up so that way it's easier to trim if they're on a similar axis. And I'm stamping that on the edge of the paper, and I'm going to use my white embossing powder and emboss the sentiment. So the first one says wishing you a, and then the second one says birthday. So I'm also going to have a fun sentiment that says magical after this is done. So now that these are embossed, I wait till it's cooled down, and I'm going to use my paper trimmer just to trim down. And then I use my large scissors just to trim a little more. Because it's such a small piece, it won't be super noticeable if it's not super straight. So now that those are done, I'm going to work on the magical part. So what I did to help me line up this sentiment, because it actually comes in two different pieces, magic and all, AL, I used the die cut that will cut out magical first out of some scrap paper. And I'm using my Misty here to help line it up. Now forgive me, my ponytail does show a few times because I'm trying really hard to get that sentiment stamp right inside of the die cut. So I started with magic. I'm using my Onyx black ink again, and I'm going to stamp magic, and I'm going to peel that off and use the AL for magical. And this one actually took me a little while because it's a small stamp and it's new, it's super sticky, and it kept getting stuck to my finger. So every time I tried to move it, it would move with me when I pulled my hand away. So I finally get it placed where I want it, and I also use that VersaFine and Onyx Black. And I'm actually going to emboss this with this holographic embossing powder by Ranger. It's so fun. It just adds such a fun glimmer to the sentiment without changing the color. So now that that is on, I'm going to heat that up and melt the embossing powder, and it makes this fun shimmer onto my word. And now I will cut that out by lining up that scrap first around the word, so that way I know it will cut out perfectly around my word. So I'm adding the paper, adding the dye, and I ran it through a machine and it cut it out perfectly. So now I'm going to work on my placement. At first I thought of putting it toward the left, but it felt very heavy on the left. So I'm moving it to be above the castle, and I felt that it evened out the card because there's kind of that gap in between the two boy wizards, and I thought that really just evened out the card placement. It didn't look very heavy on either side. And I'm also popping up these sentiments, but I'm only using one foam square now. I'm not doubling up. And once I have that all down, I wanted to add some bling. So I have these really pretty sequins from Trinity Stamps. That is from a sequin set called Deep Space Voyage. And I picked out various sequins to place around my sentiment. I used some of the black, the blue, and the purple just to kind of add with the fading of my sky. And once I have placement of all of those, I'm going to glue them down. Fortunately, I didn't realize that my camera died. So I'm going to fast forward here, and you'll see that I've glued down my sequins as well as the moon and the smaller of the black clouds that you see on the left here. And now that everything is glued and in place, I'm so excited to show you this final card, and it lights up with their wands. It's so fun. I really hope you like this card as much as I do. But of course, I've got to test it out in the dark, so let's see how it looks with no lights on. Yay! I think it's so fun. I hope you enjoyed watching this card. I hope it inspires you to try out some lights on your own cards. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and have a magical day.